We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today we have Jenner back with us, who's kind of becoming adopted as the co-host, sort of, or something.
What's up?
Yo, and also today coming in as the pirate for Hope Morty is Jeff.
Hey, what's going on?
So, yeah, we're just all a bunch of Facebook group misfits, so to speak, and what do you call it? We have been up to our usual things lately and chatting about politics and philosophy and all kinds of things. And Jeff was in on our live chat the other day, but just on the text version. And so we thought it'd be cool to get him in on the audio version as well. So here we are. So Jeff, if you'll just take like a quick moment or so and let us know anything about you as far as your goals and dreams and ambitions, or at least what you try to accomplish from social media and those type of things.
Yeah, social media and all that is pretty much just for fun. A lot of the stuff that we do, like a lot of the discussions we have, is just kind of fun for me for the philosophical and the debate aspects. Most of the stuff I do, most of the times people, like when I talk to people, what I get platformed a lot for more has to do with the gambling industry because that's where I'm heavily set into. So like this whole thing is sort of like just different for me, and it's just a different thing to approach, and it's just for fun.
Okay. What is it, by the way, just for the sake of that's interesting, what is it more specifically how you're involved in the gambling industry?
Yeah, so I've worked in casino surveillance for a while, so we do a lot of catching people cheating, looking for new types of scams, different ways people money launder, stuff like that.
Wow. Okay. It just reminds me of the most recent season, especially of Ozark. I assume you saw that.
No, actually, I watched the first season, heard they're going to do a casino boat, and I got real interested, and then I just haven't picked it back up for whatever reason.
I mean, if you like Breaking Bad, because it's kind of the same type of thing, especially by season 3, I would definitely recommend it. And yeah, without any spoilers, they get into a lot of that stuff, especially in season 3.
Oh yeah, and I live out obviously where Breaking Bad was filmed and all that. My girlfriend actually worked where I don't know if you remember Tuco, like in the early seasons, but his like where Walter White like blew out all the windows on his building. That's the building where my girlfriend worked. She's an architect, and they work out of that building.
Oh, so you're actually in the same city, not just the same state.
Yeah, no. We live in a suburb of Albuquerque, but we live like in Albuquerque too sometimes, and they film all around here, or they did. Now they do Better Call Saul out here.
They're still filming Better Call Saul, huh?
Yeah.
Cool. What was I gonna say? Oh, do you know Milo, by the way? He's in here sometimes.
Milo. I think I've seen the first name. If I saw if I saw his picture, I'd probably remember better.
Yeah, he has some artwork for his picture. He was on a live a couple weeks ago. I only mentioned that because he does something similar to that as well. But anyways, so I don't know where we want to go with this today. Jenner, do you want to add anything before we just start riffing on some of our recent topics or anything?
Oh man, I'm just hanging out. I'm just chilling. I got my notepad. I'll be Jamie.
You'll be Jamie. What's Jamie?
It's a Rogan joke, ongoing joke.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The invisible sidekick of Joe Rogan. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so a couple things. One, I hope I'm not beating it to death, but we could. It almost needs to be beat to death. Is the we're I think in the same group, at least Jeff and I, of this Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debate, and I was just trying to get a kind of a jump start on that this week by having some kind of pre-discussions on that, just because it's such a massively deep topic, and so I don't know if we wanted to probably touch on that for a little bit.
Yeah, we definitely could. I know that we were in the same group, so I was looking at the people that were in the group, and I was like, you know what, I think Isaac and I are going to be the ones that end up talking the most there. So I didn't know if
Yeah.
because I think Jesse wanted to sort of moderate, and I wasn't sure if anybody else really was going to be that into it or show up or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one reason I wanted to have some of my own little chats beforehand is so I could kind of get things off my chest / sort things out. So then when it's Jesse's thing here in a couple days, uh, I'll be able to kind of like have it together and just say this and this and this is what I'm thinking about, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Whichever way you want to take it. Like, if there's a specific, I'll admit I only watched the first one again recently, and I don't remember all the others like in super detail.
Okay, well, so I don't know if so just the main topic, and this will kind of just help get an idea for where you're coming from, is, and this kind of like what I've been a little bit spinning off lately, which I think is worth it, is the idea of the utility of acting as if there's a God, not just necessarily in is that a cool, fun idea or what, but the utility of it. Now, the only thing, I think there's only one thing people really miss in the second debate. I haven't got into all of them yet, but in the second debate, they kind of got stuck for a long time on, these deep issues of Kant and the biological structure of our value system and things. So they kind of got stuck on that, but they did kind of review the first debate, and then they used an interesting illustration, which is sort of this fiction they agreed on, where they said one thing, example where people have a fiction but it's useful is like if we're here in the same room and we are practicing gun safety and we have a gun with us, but I wanted to like give it to you, hand it to you, whatever. And then for safety reasons, I'm going to make sure it's either unloaded or on safety or, all those things. And then, but even if I know it's loaded and on safety, I still am going to take it and hand it as if it were loaded and not on safety, just to be careful and make sure that there's not like any human error, which isn't just like whoops, but it's like whoops, there goes your face. So same thing. It's sort of a parallel with, and when we talked about this the other day, Jenna brought up the idea that's almost like a what was the word? The wager.
Pascal's wager.
Yeah, Pascal's wager.
You might as well just believe in a God and act as if there was one, because if you're right, awesome, and if you're wrong, it's bad.
Yeah, we'd also have to decide based on Pascal's wager which God is the gun and which outcome is the bullet. Like, is the gun the Christian God and is the bullet the afterlife, or is like which God is going to be the gun here? Right.
So usually that's talking about the afterlife, but I think one thing that we need to start doing more is talk about these kind of things, not so much in the afterlife scenario, because it's almost kind of like, sure, if somebody wants to practice those things with the hope for an afterlife, whether they're going to pray certain prayers or whatever, then good for them if that is useful for them. But what's more useful is what's going to make people better inside and also practically in this world here and now. So that was kind of an illustration that somewhat wrapped up or like summarized what they were getting at in their first debate, although that was at the start of the second debate, which was just this whole thing of there's a lot of utility in acting as though there's a God, and mainly that Jordan Peterson believes that Sam Harris actually does do the same thing, but he just uses different language and goes about it in a different way.
Well, I think that stems from the fact that Jordan Peterson's definition of God is essentially just evolution. Like his whole thing is whatever creates the best legacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we act as if what we're doing is going to create a better legacy. It's going to get passed down better, right? That's more or less his stance on it?
I find it very, very hard to track when I've heard Jordan try to explain this, because I'm a Sam Harris fan, but I have not seen, I don't think, any of the, are these recent debates? Because I saw the first 2 stage ones that they did. Okay. But it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's, shit, what? Pick it up. Where's the thread? Where is it? Shit. Fuck, I lost it. It happens all the time. Oh, no, on the definitional thing. Because when most people hear the word God, there is a supernatural right along, tagging along to that word that comes. So when a lot of people hear it, they don't. This is where my angle had come from. Now I have a much more nuanced, complicated understanding of what the word the God actually means. But for most people, it invokes a kind of supernatural, spooky things. So for like the rational, sciencey, skeptic-y people, I think that's what it is. Largely a language game, and
that's and that's kind of
what we actually mean.
And that's sort of what Sam Harris pokes at a lot. Jordan Peterson does bring up the point that he doesn't necessarily believe in that. He believes more. His definition of God is a bit different. He tries to get into it a little bit, but pretty much. And Isaac can correct me if he interprets it differently. The way I've interpreted like what Jordan Peterson has said, both in this debate and outside of it, is more he views God as sort of like this legacy type thing. Like we always strive to be, somebody that will create better attributes to pass on better, and in that way we act as if a God exists.
Essentially, I would say it's something like, there's a lot of layers to it, but basically, it's like God is like the ideal. So the ideal, pinnacle of the perfect
our
person.
potential, right? Like
like how the perfect person acts. So each and every human being sometimes behaves that way. No one behaves that way always, but we hold ourselves up to certain ideals, and that's why we have the hero stories and the religious stories and God stories, so that there's a better understanding of the perfect way to act. Because otherwise, in the example that I sort of gave, which is why it's appropriate that you're Morty today, is that if
evil Morty, though,
the evil Morty,
I figured I might as well embrace my archetype.
Yeah, you might as well. But it's funny because my point was that if you really acted as if there was no God, like you really believed that and everything, and especially if you just were brought up with that understanding your whole life, that it's all just mechanistic, so to speak, the sort of like a atomistic, scientific realist sort of view, you would behave more like Rick Sanchez than Sam Harris. And not that Rick's a totally horrible guy, but he's just kind of thinking about himself and what he feels like doing.
I mean, I lived like that for the first 33 years of my life, and I wasn't running around like a sociopath. I'm just saying from my personal experience, my conception of God and the religious experience and spirituality just in general, what the actual mission is, the path and the torch and, getting into all that deep shit. This is a very new kind of thing for me. I've lived most of my life as the guy who was just like, I don't I don't believe in any kind of, because the word's so loaded. It has not loaded, but it has a lot of fucking baggage. The word God has a lot of baggage. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's like 5,000 of them on Earth. So it gets very, very... This is why I'm kind of like, if I ever roll in the new atheist movement, it's like, let's find a better word. Let's find a more productive word for what we're actually talking about.
It's really tricky because whoever you are, whatever background you have, if you're going to say, okay, I'm living toward an ideal, or I'm living toward God, or I'm living toward whatever. And this is tricky because I think it's where Dawkins and Harris and some of the other new atheists are failing. And sometimes they admit that. And okay, it's like if you want to say it's better to have no religion at all and there's a better morality that can come out of just facts, great. let's see it. What's your whole plan for that? How are you going to build communities? Because all that they really have built up is this dogma of religion's horrible, religion's horrible, religion's horrible, when it's like, I can't see in our lifetime a huge movement away from religion. I mean, sure, there may be a measurable trend of more atheists and less religious people, so to speak, over the next coming decades and everything. But they haven't really made that case for how that people are gonna find morality and values just out of the facts that they present. But
I'll make it right now. Make it right
sure.
now, because I think anybody who's looking for the new religion, the new replacement, the thing to fill the hole, I think is thinking of it kind of upside down or inside out almost. We don't need a new dogma to overtake the old dogma. What we really need is a new enlightenment in terms of individual empowerment on the level to where we're not trying to tell people how to live their lives, but rather to get them to look within themselves and to want to improve their lives on their own. Because humans don't want to live in misery. We don't want to struggle. We all want to improve, but we feel kind of helpless a lot of the time. So I think that the answer is actually an individual empowerment, because I think an empowered individual who is mindful, who is, compassionate towards others, who does, this kind of thing is going to be, it's by default is going to solve the problem. This is a bottom up versus top down thing. I don't think we need a new rule book. I think we just need to trust people. Show them the love and the trust to help everybody grow together. As fucking cheesy as that, I know that sounds cheesy and kind of Mr. Rogers-y, but it's kind of true,
Well, and I would say briefly on that, and then I want to hear Jeff's take. But that's really, I think, the right approach, and I think what would be ideal. And I got into this a little bit in our last chat with some of my own personal experience, but I think what would be ideal is to bring up the world in as honest of a way as possible. And a lot of people do that, but a lot of people don't. So the honest way would be tell people who are seeking and not sure to just say, because whatever the case is for God, whoever we are, whatever our background is, whatever our dogma may or may not be, we don't really know for sure, because you can rationalize it any which way, but the second you start to say something like, well, God this, God that, God couldn't do this, God would have to do that if this and this and this, you're just making your own personal judgments, because if there's any possibility that there's a God, and there is, it's a possibility at least, then in that realm of possibility, it could be anything. It could be, unicorns and leprechauns, but probably not. But it could be nothing. So it's a statement of faith and belief. And so the honest way to sort of bring up the new generations is to say, here's some ideals, and here's some principles and some values, and here's some stories that have helped people for however many thousands of years. And here's some pitfalls to it. Here's some things to watch out for. But in the end, we don't really know. And therefore, it's a statement of faith. So you have to go through your own experience and make up your own mind through your own inner compass, inner guidance.
Do not look out, look within. If you search for the answer, seek within, motherfuckers. It's but trite but true.
I like to hear what Jeff thinks on this.
So, I mean, I would primarily agree with that. I think the main point that we would sort of disagree on or hold different value to is a lot of what you described as like sort of a goal that we could use. I see like Aesop's fables could fill that void without having a dogma attached to it, for example. Disney is doing a good job of portraying ideals via story, and they also don't say like, but you have to believe that we're the ultimate figure, Yeah. So I think that's more the goal of atheism, is to say like, yeah, these tools are useful, but we don't need this extra stuff on there. And the extra stuff is the stuff that we have a problem with, because that's where people start conflating their own personal things onto it, or they use it as a justification for things that might not really belong in the story. It really creates a closed-mindedness rather than an open-mindedness to the interpretation of the story and the values.
Yeah, dogmatism really is kind of the problem.
Yeah,
It's like if you're that dogmatic about any of your views, no matter what they are,
right.
that's really
Even
kind of
dogmatic about equality or dogmatic about anti-racism, and one of the things that they
speech,
right. One of the things they got into in the first debate, which I think is really important, is how that's one thing that they really kind of focused in on, is that they agree that the big problem more than anything is dogma, and there is a lot of fine and peaceful, productive religions doing good things in the world and in history. But the big issue is dogma, and the main reason that they can largely agree on that is because a lot of the issues in history now, Hitler's up for debate, but I don't really think you can call him Christian just because he kind of scapegoated God, like, oh, God made me do it. It's same thing with a lot of others in history. It's like if they completely behave like they're not a Christian, and then at the end they're like, well, why'd you do it? God or something. Okay, I guess all Christians are Hitler. So
I think he actually did mention Jesus in a few of his public speeches. I think he actually did mention Christ and God
although
a
it's
few
really
times. I'm
hard
not
to
a
follow
historian, but
it's really hard to follow his ideology, because sometimes he's on board with those kind of things, and sometimes he's not. A lot of what it was too, it was the populace kind of like, oh, if the populace wants to hear this, then I'll say it. And if the populace wants to hear this about, German nationalism or anti-Semitism or whatever, then whatever, just to, preach what the people want to hear and get them on board. But same thing with, Lenin's USSR and Mao's China. They were non-theist. I don't know if you'd call them atheist movement, but at least non-theist movements. But they were so dogmatic that they were just as bad or deadly as, the other religious dogmas. So the real issue is dogma. You're right, and we need to raise people up to say, here's the possible things that have been useful, but here's the things to watch out for. And then,
but how do we keep a reference to a God figure and get rid of dogma at the same time?
Well, okay, so
Spinoza.
I'm not necessarily. Okay, do you want to talk more about that?
One more answer. Spinoza's God, but I was going to mention. I lost the thread again.
No,
but with Spinoza's God, I feel like it's a helpful one, and it's the same one Einstein. It was his same kind of concept of God, which is just essentially synonymous with nature.
the kind where he just kind of a God that kind of set the world in motion approximately with the Big Bang.
Not even as a noun doing a thing. It's really more, it's just synonymous with nature. It's synonymous with a process, and this is what I was going to mention earlier about it's very different to teach people science. Okay, it's very, very different to teach people how to do science, because science is a process. Oh God, I'm not going to do my Carl Sagan impersonation.
More Carl Sagan.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine-tooth comb, with a fine understanding of human fallibility, kids. It really is. Science is a process, and philosophy is a process as well. It's not enough. And religion is a process. Spirituality is a process. It's not enough to, see the books, read the books, read them like Shakespeare, just searching through the ancient ruins of history for wisdom. But as literature, I think that's the right process there. Religion is a process. It's a personal process, and it's kind of like a scientific process. It's like an evolutionary process in a lot of ways as well.
Well,
like Darwinian.
I would say on those lines that with you, what you're saying is how that we have to embody the scientific process. I would say that
Not even. It's just like the fact that it's a verb is the thing that I'm getting at. It's
it's not
tying
just
it
fact,
strictly to science
doing.
is different, because the spiritual process is like this. It's like a verb.
Right.
It's not a book of nouns that you get from something else.
Right.
It's something that
You
you
have to keep
do.
doing it, keep updating
Philosophy, yes. Education is another,
Well,
it's like
'cause I
education
would-
in general, because you can never really finish it. It's a process.
Because I would say okay, because the danger is dogma. So you don't want to dogmatically, like, even if we all agreed, okay, atheism is the way, woo-ha, or whatever, we don't then want to be dogmatic, especially when we've got, like, thousands and thousands of years of religious text saying something the other way. Because then if we're dogmatically atheist, then the people will rise up and burn us at the stake, and they'll be like, no, look, we found in all these books that there's a God. Screw you. Because people's nature is inherently will rebel against dogma. Now, on the other hand, if we say one of the things that you need to watch out for and stay away from as much as you can is you want to stay away from authoritarian, tyrannical, dogmatic type things. So you can tell people, here's the potentiality of things that you can go through, experience, explore if you wish, but here's the things to watch out for. So, like, one, for example, is the people complain about with even Christians, is that they will sometimes forsake this life and just kind of be like losers or morons or whatever the case, because they kind of, and sometimes even suicidal or needlessly giving their lives for the faith when they shouldn't,
or
because
their
they're
kids.
Well,
their kids, there's a lot of those too, like the fundamentalist mommies who lose it.
yeah.
They're like, we're all going to heaven together, kids, come on.
Yeah. So one of the main principles is, like, okay, even if you want to try to have those religious experiences or experience that or entertain those ideas, one thing to be careful about is don't waste this life because of a promise of another life. If you end up believing that and you get another life rather than whatever, then cool, good for you. But don't screw up this life for that reason. So that would be like one of the principles. And there's probably a list of principles where it's like, okay, if somebody's going to be religious, because definitely, at least for the foreseeable future, at least for our lifetimes, there will definitely be a lot of religion and also a lot of atheism and everything else. So it's like you got to start drawing out the principles for, like, okay, if you want to have a religious experience and experience gods or whatever, go for it. But here's the principles to watch out for. So,
indeed. And if you're going to make a wager, I think if you're going to make the wager, bet on one. One is a safe bet. One is all you get. That sounded deeper and Dr. Seussier than one life. I mean, it's better, better to operate as if under that assumption that you're only getting one, that this is all you get. I think is something helpful, because if you have this vision of some utopic, future heaven or whatever, you kind of like, this is kind of a throwaway life. You're like,
but I would say, okay, if you're gonna bet on one, bet on this one. But that's
just the number one, just the thing we're doing right now.
Yeah, but that's almost like the thing where I would say we want to kind of try to hold opposites, where in a way we can think of it as there is eternal life, even if it's more of a metaphor, in that we don't know for sure. Like, if there were some kind of eternal life, like a heaven and everything else, then it's still just a faith statement, because no one will ever know.
Oh, sure. It's logically fallacious. It's a reverse Pascal's wager, almost, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
I think if in a study, if we were to study this, people, which that would be impossible to do in humans, but somebody living their life as if like, oh no, I'm going to go off to heaven and then live in the fluffy clouds forever. And then the other person who's like, oh, fuck, I have to cherish every second of every day. I have to go hug my kids and play with the dog and go to the beach.
It's tricky, because then that's why I say it's almost like, Rick Sanchez kind of attitude, and the nihilism.
There's
which
a nihilism in it, yeah.
Yeah,
But I
there's a
mean, you make
nihilism with
arguments that Rick Sanchez follows a Norse god, one that rewards battle opportunity and progress. Like, there's still a god you could justify if you wanted to. It's very subjective on how you take the word God, which is part of the reason it's problematic using it in an argument like that. Because, like, for the same reason, I could say, Isaac, you don't believe in God because when we catch thieves, you don't think we should cut off their hands. I don't know if you actually believe that or not, but obviously Allah, the God, says we should. You don't think that, so you don't live as if God exists.
I'm pretty sure the Old Testament says that shit too. I'm
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, Old Testament
or is it
Islam are pretty close.
I know it says that in the Quran. I don't know. Maybe it says in the Old Testament too, but
pretty sure. Cut off the hand of the thief.
Well, that is. I think they got into that a little bit in that first debate. As far as some of those weird things that it says, but we have to understand the literalness and the metaphoricalness and the just statements of faith in religious writing, in that these people were trying to say, okay, we're holding up certain ideals of like the best way to act and all those kind of things, and this is our best way that we can conceptualize it, and we're supposed to write it down, so here we go. And at that time, when people had lower IQs and very little writing and everything else, it worked for them, and that doesn't necessarily make that it's right to cut people's hands off in certain situations. And sometimes it's more of the principle of the thing, which is actually what you see happen throughout the Bible text, where pre-Bible, and they talked about this, I think, in the first debate, maybe the second debate, where pre-Bible they were literally sacrificing human beings, usually or often their children, where probably one of the very first Bible stories, is the story of Abraham and Isaac, where God tells them, go sacrifice your favorite son. And then I think in the Quran version, it's sacrifice his other son. But either case, or I don't know if it was both in the Quran, but anyway, in either case, it's like sacrifice your son. And at the last minute, it's like, okay, now we know, you and I know, Abraham, you would do that, so I'm not going to make you do it. So instead, sacrifice this goat or whatever. And then he does. And it's actually before that, but then it's just a continual practice of symbolically sacrificing this thing that they kill. And, usually they would eat it anyway, but it's a symbolic
thing. Did they
eat
the children before the goat?
What's that?
Would they eat children before they started sacrificing goats?
Sorry, I don't think so. But one reason why I mentioned that is because with the Old Testament coming on the scene, they don't mention any literal, children or human sacrifice or anything like that happened. It was just like, okay, we're just going to do goats and sheep and whatever other animals as symbolically. And the symbolism really works in that we want to kill our old ways, bury them, and have like a new life and a new being, like a revival of consciousness. And then throughout the Old Testament, the New Testament, then that was then replaced by Jesus. So then we don't have to sacrifice animals, but we just do so completely metaphorically. So,
see, this is the and they brought this up in that first debate too. This is where it gets a little bit into it becomes very subjective territory where people can put onto it what they think is the most likely cause of the symbolism. Sure. And you do start to get away less from the dogmatism, which is good, but then it also becomes like what's the purpose of it being this text, when this text obviously has problems that we all agree on. And we can just subject, like, the symbolism, like you said, for getting rid of the old ways, taking on the new. It can also, I've heard arguments that it symbolizes, the goat represents the devil, and it's representing getting rid of the sin of their life, or the goat represents this or that. Well, like, it's very, and I don't mind that it's subjective. It's just a matter of, when we take things as subjective, which is fine, we have to realize that we can't add it onto a dogmatic thing that also has like, homosexuality is just wrong. Regardless of if it was, I've heard arguments, I think from Connor, about like, well, it was wrong back then. It's like, all right, well then we don't need it now. So why do we keep holding on to this thing that has teachings that don't matter anymore.
Okay, well, okay. One reason.
Flag pause. Wait, yeah. Hold on.
Well,
Elaborate.
one reason I feel like it's important to have some kind of a supreme ideal is because even if we have a bad supreme ideal, like sometimes we might have got, I don't know if you saw some of these posts that I made with Jesse or whatever, where it's like, and we won't diverge to politics probably just yet, but it's like even having a horrible, like everybody knows the president's an idiot gives us that utility, so we could say, okay, he's an idiot, so what would a non-idiot do? So that's not to like compare necessarily the Bible to Donald Trump, but in a way it kind of works in that if we have a supreme ideal, whatever it is, whether it's a president, a king, or just whoever that a hero is, or like if you hold your father as an ideal or whatever, then every time that your father, the king, or the president, or the main religious text fails in some regard, where it's like, oh, we shouldn't treat these people that way, we should do this, obviously no slaves, no polygamy, whatever, then it's like we can see, okay, whether or not we could say that was wrong back then is debatable, but we can say, okay, the principle underneath all that is the same, which is love people and help people transform and become more mature, more enlightened people, and then a better world will emerge out of it.
Yeah, but I'm mainly hearing a lot of arguments for like why it's good to have like a base principle, but like I wouldn't call it supreme because then it just makes it dogmatic again, because then we can never challenge it.
Well, no, that's what I was saying, is that to have a supreme text, just it's like the same thing when we had a king. In some nations still have that, but if you have a king where you can say, okay, for sure that guy is supposed to be in charge and what he says is the law of the land, every time that he says something wrong, everybody will be like, oh, screw the king, but we have to follow him or whatever. When there's something as a supreme ideal, it's not necessarily that it should be dogmatic or enforced dogmatically, but it's like a measuring stick. And even if you hold up that measuring stick and you say that's wrong, but we see the underlying principle, it's like it helps us renew the principles and renew what to put into action. But so the reason that's important is because if we're just like facts are all there is, which is kind of what Sam Harris and people in his camp are about, it gets super confusing, because it's like there's nothing to hold up as a supreme anything to say, even if they're right, wrong, or indifferent, other than if the facts are not facts kind of thing. And then it's just, that's when you slip into the other, like there's no truth kind of thing.
Well, that's like the counter argument though that is made against Sam Harris and like science materialism. I know. I think you guys talked about it a little bit the other day.
Yep.
Like it tries to make claims about through materialism, and you've actually referenced it as somewhat religious, right? That it does like try to make some sort of basis principle. And sorry, go ahead.
I just said it can become its own dogma.
Yeah, it can become its own dogma. But I mean, I don't know if you've been trolling in the other parts before, but I know you've said like everybody's religious to some aspect, right?
Well, we behave religiously,
which would make us religious, right?
All right. So we kind of need to update the vocabulary, I would think. So
the religious impulse is universal among humans, I think would be a better way to put it.
Right. So a lot of the vocabulary needs to be updated, because if anyone acts as if that their life means something, and that's a good terminology, that the religious impulse is universal, they act as if life and values and all those things mean something, then they behave in a religious way. Just like, Jordan Peterson will never say he prescribes a certain dogma or religion or specific God. Of course, it seems more of the Judeo-Christian type or whatever. I think what he's really doing, which I respect a lot, is he's taken the time over a lot of books and a lot of decades to say this is what I'm doing honestly, whether I admit it or not, is what's going on, which I think is what everybody does if they live their life passionately and try to derive meaning out of life. It's not necessarily one dogma or another, or even necessarily dogmatic, but it's that if you live your life passionately and meaningfully and trying to find purpose, especially when people get all passionate about atheism, they make essentially or any kind of belief, they start to make religious statements about their beliefs and behave religiously. And same thing. They made the point about the USSR and debatably Nazi Germany and Mao's China, that those were essentially religious figures and religious organizations. And for sure in North Korea, like if you look at the interviews of anybody who escaped out of North Korea, they don't have any religious terminology, but they make their supreme leader exactly the same as a god and do all the same language as a god, because that's the way to get people behaving a certain way. So
it's actually kind of fascinating because it's probably one of the last cultures on Earth that's still like that, because ancient Egypt was like that. The pharaoh was a living god.
Right.
This is how ancient Egyptian society works. So it's a really interesting relic, I think, just anthropologically.
Yeah.
North Korea, that is clearly coming to an end some point very soon.
Hopefully.
In fucking fire or ice, who knows what's going to happen there. But no, just on I had to flag myself because of talking about the religious impulse as being just a natural phenomenon. This is just a natural human phenomenon, like sexuality. It expresses itself differently
right.
in everybody. So
right.
Religion, the word there, specifically the word religion, like God, has all of that baggage. Even words like spirituality aren't great for really getting at the main thing, and it's because they have way too much fucking baggage. It's like trying to elect Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, we need new vocabulary.
And you can't just let's try. It's comedic relief, people. I really don't want to talk about politics. I think ever again. I'm good on politics pretty much forever. I want to talk philosophy.
We'll see.
But yeah,
maybe in a philosophical way from time to time.
We need exactly. Yeah, we need better words.
On that note, but I'll just say, my only issue with politics is that, one, it gets really redundant, and then two, it's usually not talking about what they say that they're talking about. That's why a lot of times in my group, I bring up the idea of projections, because, they're like unleashing their demons on the president or whoever so that they don't have to deal with their own demons themselves. I think it's cool to talk about politics in that way, because it's more like dealing with the reality of what's going on that most people don't like to talk about.
The social phenomenon. Like an anthropologist would study the weird ass species of monkey that we are and the weird shit that we're doing. I'm all about that.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Throwing
fuck politics. Let's do that.
Like space monkeys. Okay, where were we before that? Like, let's not talk about politics yet thing. We were on something.
We were on vocabulary.
Words.
The words, but as to it's about, because everybody is religious in their own way. I don't know. I think there is something I was going to say.
There is a better phrase. This would be a better. There's a better phrase for that in another language that none of us can speak. It's written in a color that none of us can see, but it is there.
Wait,
there is a perfect phrase for that. It's not in English and it's not written in a color we can see, but it is there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, no,
we'll figure it out.
I think that's okay. That's the issue that Sam and Jordan were running into, is they wanted to, or at least Jordan wanted to talk about how, okay, we've got our facts, right, which are it gets really tricky trying to talk to Sam about facts because okay, and this is something on this notion that I didn't really go into before, but it's like one of their main things is Sam talks about how okay, imagine the worst possible world that anybody could ever have. Like, basically, people constantly being tortured in pain. So basically, describes hell supposedly on Earth. So we want to avoid that, right? That's just a fact. Compared to the world of bliss and helping each other and utopia, so to speak, basically describes heaven on Earth essentially. Then he's like, we want to shoot for that. And the big problem with that is that if the world were that simple, like do this and you'll go more that direction and avoid that, then we would have zero problems almost because we could constantly be like, oh, you're going towards the torture each other side. And oh, you're going towards the, in whatever enlightenment, heaven on earth side. And then we wouldn't even need to be dogmatic. It'd be like, oh, there it is. Do this and not do that. And then there would be almost nobody going the torture each other path. But the world is like infinitely more complicated where, like Sam talked about like, oh, look, it's just a fact that, fire is hot. So you're going to remove your hand. And then Jordan made the point. I don't remember exactly where in the discussions, but he's like, what if going into fire will save a baby? And which is true. We're constantly faced with those things where it's like, okay, Andy made the point that like, even though a dog is wired one way, they can be trained to be like, where pain will make them wag their tail. So but all that's just to say that there's the facts and there's the values. But what Jordan was getting at is he believes that our sort of invisible value structure in our brains / psyche, whatever, soul, maybe our consciousness has been unconsciously maybe what has given us values out of facts and given us the ability to constantly update those because the facts are constantly changing. Like being born in this world is dramatically different than being born, 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 years ago. So
very true. But that would lead to arguments about why we would need constantly updated moral systems, right? Like very fluid.
Right. Well, that's the thing is that it's fluid, but the value structure is always inside of us. And that's why it gets really confusing, especially with our dramatically different and constantly changing world, exactly what to do, but it's constantly changing. And, Jordan will sometimes give the example of, if you can feel in your body, and a lot of all kinds of even just like completely atheist people will say it in psychology and everything else, you can feel in your body when you're doing something not to do, where you're doing something dishonest or you're doing something that makes you feel weak or you're doing something that'll backstab somebody else or whatever. You can feel it. And so what that means is even if you don't understand it, even if it's like just ingrained into you deeply that is this structure, whether that's how much of that is biological or consciousness, that can always guide you if you follow it. Almost like that.
I would really disagree with that because I think we can definitely have impulses that are wrong, right? Like there's definitely people that saw interracial couples kissing and they had this internal impulse that said, hey, that's wrong, I don't like that, because that's how they had been conditioned to react to it. So I think basing that we just only trust our instincts and our natural ways of already doing things that we're ingrained to be right, I think is totally off base. I think we're constantly trying to find out what we're wrong about. Because like if you have something I want, my natural impulse is to want to take it, right?
Yeah.
So I totally don't agree with the concept that our natural impulses have been ingrained to be correct.
We're tricky. Awful shit flinging monkeys. I'm so glad that you brought up the moral landscape.
It's a good point, but it's tricky.
I have to kind of jump in here for Sam because I've heard people criticize the thesis, if you will, of moral landscape many times, and I think that
Which is what? Can you summarize it for us briefly?
This is Sam's argument that you're making about when you invoked, the worst possible suffering for everybody
Sure.
versus the best possible thriving for everybody. That
Right,
is, there are higher and lower peaks on the realm of possibility. And the biggest I've heard a lot of criticisms around this, and it's actually a really fantastic book if you haven't read it. But the criticisms tend to be fairly low resolution. And the thing, because I'm a gamer nerd, was like, okay, if that picture of the moral landscape is kind of like Tomb Raider, the original Tomb Raider 1 with like the big triangle tits, when it's a lot closer to like the latest Tomb Raider games, which are like crazy. You can see her pores and sweat and blood and tears and like every strand of hair. So of course, there's a resolution problem with his argument that I think people don't really understand. Because there are physical things that we can do. It's not necessarily that they're facts that one is better than the other, but there are physical things that we can say about suffering, whether it is physical suffering, psychological suffering. We're starting to understand the nature of ourselves and the nature of our minds in ways now where we can describe better and worse states of being, or mentally, physically, whatever. That's my interpretation of his argument, but that is you have to kind of do the simulation inside a simulation inside a simulation thing and go down really, really, really high resolution on because every single moral or ethical quandary that's going to come across your path is going to require intense investigation. You're going to have to get in there with a microscope, and you might see that everything's on a cob, and it's like, well, fuck. You know what I mean? But that's the thing about the moral landscape that's the thing about the moral landscape that I don't really hear people talking about, because he's not necessarily saying that this is factually better than this. I think that's a little bit too low resolution.
Well, what he was
for
trying to say,
and
this was kind of their debate, is that he was saying factually we know that it's better to not torture people, and especially innocent people and those kind of things. He just says it's a fact, and it may be a fact, but it's not so simply a fact. Even the worst thing, like punching a baby or whatever, or kicking a puppy, you can say, oh, factually we can understand, don't kick babies and punch, or kick puppies and punch babies or whatever, but it's not exactly that simple. We know that almost like a common sense, but that's because of our culture that we grew up in and the brains that we have been given and everything else that's handed down. Did
we lose Jeff?
Are you there, Jeff? We lost.
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I was typing something. I didn't want you guys to have to hear all my keyboard noise.
Oh, no worries. That's great. Checking. If you were a podcast guest, it would be like, thank you, sir. Yeah. That's amazing. It's the grain of sand on the beach thing, because if you look at the beach as the whole thing, but then if you zoom down on a single grain of sand, you see it's like this crazy, tiny, complicated, individual little thing. Well, and the thing that you were just talking about, fucking Sam, and I fucking had it. God damn, I'd say it was along the resolution thing. It was a really cutting off the hand. Because this is a dogmatic statement saying, like, either cut off the hand or don't cut off the hand. Okay, but what if that hand gets partially eaten by a meat grinder and it's medically necessary to remove that hand? That's a very different moral situation. If we're talking about the moral landscape, whether it is moral to cut somebody's hand off, the question of whether or not it was because they stole a piece of fruit or because their arm got ripped up in a meat grinder and you have to do that to save the person's life. Those are
Right.
very different moral questions. And this is where the landscape, this is where Sam's metaphor of higher and lower peaks, valleys,
Well,
but it is a very high resolution. There is a single grain of sand on the ground in that universe. It's
and
not
that's
just
what
kind of,
makes it
it's not
what makes it
Minecraft.
really tricky
Okay.
and hard to follow because in Christianity, for example, let's say you could just say, okay, maybe the book of Revelation in the Old Testament is a little confusing, but try to emulate the values of Jesus Christ. And then a person can look at some of the books, the first 5 to however many books in the New Testament at least, and just say, okay, those are the values of Jesus Christ, and then they try to emulate that. Just for example, Jesus is advocate or whatever. Then on the other hand, so that's like relatively simple, where like someone with an IQ of 90-ish could somewhat try to do that, and you would say, but try to not do this, and don't lose your this life and hopes for an next, and give us some extra principles on top of that, which was one of the arguments they got into. I forget exactly when, because that's part of the issue is like this moral landscape thing might work for somebody who's got an IQ of at least about 120-ish and has read a lot of, or at least 1 or 2 of Sam's books. But to explain that simply to someone and just be like, facts will give you values and stuff, it's just really hard to get it to make sense.
It still feels very low resolution to me, because what I'm saying, because I love Sam, but I'm not a fanboy. I'm not ready to dress up in a cute little uniform and go
And I'm
door
not
to door
necessarily
and
a Jordan
deliver the
Peterson
moral
fanboy, by the
landscape
way.
or letter to a Christian nation as people as new dogma for them to hey, jump on board this thing as the answer. I think it's a helpful framing thing to think about. It's just one more piece of the puzzle, man. And it's kind of like you'll find this all over ancient wisdom. You'll find it from Shakespeare to the Stoics to everywhere else to ancient mythologies and stuff. It's just like this one more piece of the puzzle. But this is actually a good breaky point. We're about at an hour. If you guys want to take 5,
Okay.
I'll go smoke a cigarette. And if you guys need to do
you want
to
say anything else before we take a quick break, Jeff? And then we'll
no, it's all good.
Okay, so just quick break, and then we'll see if we can wrap that up and get anything else, and whatever happens, happens.
Oh no! I mean, the thing about these live streams, they go really long, and it's good to kind of mix these in every once in a while. So like if they, like. Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. Quick break for like 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Okay, guys. Hey, we just showed up at the same time.
I didn't know how long you were going to be. My piano radio was going to play us a musical intermission until we
Oh,
get back, but
you
we're
can.
here.
Is Jeff here?
Oh, we're here, and it right
Yeah, man.
on
All
the
right.
hour, motherfucker.
Wow.
10000.
Wow.
God damn, that was beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're, like,
awesome.
in
Yeah, so
sync.
let's keep this rolling. I'm loving this
Sure.
episode. I am gonna push this out of the way and sit back because I want to hear from Jeff more. But I needed to
Me
squeeze
too.
that in about the moral landscape at the resolution argument.
Yeah.
Because I am a Sammy boy. I'm not a fanboy, but I think because I've read the book. I think I understand. I might have a better grasp of his actual what he would actually, if you got him in a room rather than on a debate stage in front of a bunch of people, especially with Jordan, because that's a very difficult thing for him to do. I can tell. If you listen to their first episode on Sam's podcast, they got hung up for like an
They're
hour
both
and a half
like
just on what truth
tricksters.
is. Yeah, so this is the towers thing. They're lobbing stuff at each other. So I think if you take time to actually understand Sam's argument in the moral landscape, it is high resolution, and I'm glad that I was able to squeeze that in there. But we can.
And I do appreciate. Did you read that book, by the way? Moral Landscape.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay.
I've read all of Sam's books. Yeah.
I have not read the book. It's on my to read list. But I guess that's one of my issues is, well, twofold. One, I don't exactly get what their message is, and I've tried to hear some of it and see some of their other interviews and things like that. Both Sam and Richard Dawkins, I've gone through a couple of his books for the most part, and it's all I get out of it is that dogma and Christianity is bad, but then it just seems less with Sam, but more with Richard Dawkins. It's like, here's another dogma. And it's like, okay, if you're going to give me a new dogma, that'd be great if it was like a really good dogma. But
I don't think it's with Dawkins. I don't think it's a dogma. I think he's just cranky. He's an old guy, you know. He's just like he just gives zero fucks. He's to that I don't give a fuck age. So he's much more abrasive than I think
sure.
Most people.
But I guess for me, what a non dogma would be, for example, is if there were a belief system. And I think this is sort of what, and I'm not completely a Jordan fanboy, but I think what Jordan is sort of trying to get at, and I feel like more people should try to get at, but more maybe in their own way, is rather than saying these are bad ideas and I kind of have some other ones, but you can't really understand them because you're not as smart or something, is kind of how they come across sometimes. Is if they would just say, here's some dangers of religion, for example, which I got that, and we all know, like, yeah, let's not treat homosexuals that way, but it's fine to talk about it and whatever else, or there's like a number of things where they're like dangers to watch out for, and then it's like, but the non-dogmatic approach would be, don't do this and this and this that are the dangers of religion. And if you wanted to abandon religion altogether, cool, here's some alternatives. But if you don't, fine, stay religious, but just be careful to not be violent and be nice to gay people and whatever else. Now, that would be non-dogmatic to me, is if it's like, you can be religious, but just be careful about these things because they're really bad for the world. Then it's like, okay, cool, on board with that. You've delivered to me like a new ethic that's non-dogmatic.
I think the reason that the arguments that they're making seem dogmatic is because they are high profile public figures. It's kind of like I'm going to call this the Neil deGrasse Tyson effect, where he's the most famous astrophysicist on Earth, so everything that issues from his mouth, on some level, people take as gospel. You represent this. You're the spokesperson. You're on the pulpit. And I think that ultimately the answer is the thing that we're doing here, because we're not doing the ivory tower kind of better than you thing, which is an understandable thing why people feel that when they watch figures like like very high profile figures unpack some of these things. And I think the real intention of them doing that is showing that it's possible, A, and it's not for us to buy their books and live by them. It's for us to be inspired to carry the torch forward, to do it in our own way, because they're not prophets. They're not messengers from the clouds. They have good ideas, but we shouldn't take every single one of them as like they are issuing a doctrine.
Yeah,
Because
they're giving us more. They're giving us more tools.
Yeah, I don't think any of them think of their books as new doctrines for people to subscribe to. Especially if you look at the really edgy ones, like God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens is very to the fucking point. He's making a complicated and nuanced argument as a human being is just like him, and it was never a question of am I going to follow this individual because I believe in what he believes. It's more of it's the detachment. We need to detach this process, the thing that we're doing, the thing that we're talking about. We need to detach that from anything that resembles any kind of personality, not cult, but there are clearly within the quote IDW, there are clearly like, oh well, so and so says this, so and so says that, and I'm very much more interested in what you think and what you think and what you think and what you think. Kind of bringing back.
Well, because this is how even if few or no other people watch, although we've got a viewer, and if the viewer wants to say anything, then that's encouraged. But anyway, we're updating the knowledge structure, so to speak, and even if it's just like a little bit amongst us and friends or whatever, then that's cool. But anyway, I'd like to hear a little more from Jeff on this issue of how to get around dogma, and also maybe know a little bit more about Jeff's background and beliefs in this area.
Yeah, I'm officially going to shut up for the rest of the episode.
Shut up! No, don't. But go ahead, Jeff. Take it away.
So trying to get around dogmas, I mean, it's the struggle we've been trying to get around for a long time, right? Nobody seems to have the golden answer. It seems like a lot of. So one thing that you guys were talking about that I guess I would disagree with slightly, and I'll explain why. Is I don't think people normally present themselves or their ideas as dogmatic. You guys did say that, and I agree with it. But it's the people and the way that they take it. So, for instance, like Jenner was saying, like he doesn't really think that Dawkins would present a dogmatic situation, but like Isaac could see how it could be dogmatic, and other people that follow Dawkins, whether they're against him or for him, might be able to interpret it that way too, and then take it as a dogma. So a lot of times we try to find these ideologies that have huge amounts of dogma and say like, well, why? And do we need to keep it around? Even if it has good things in it, does it exclusively have those good things? Can we not find them elsewhere? And if we can find them elsewhere, why do we want to keep this thing? So right now, we don't have a way of like saying, here's how we eliminate the dogma from Christianity, or Islam, for instance. I'll attack Islam.
I mean, that's fine. I think we kind of do. It's just it's going to take more work. And just briefly, I think the answer is to have some agreed upon principles to live by. And then that way, every individual can be like, oh, what are those principles? Okay, I'll live by those. And then at least the basic ones like nonviolence, free speech, and things along those lines, because then they can try their different things, even if they're going to go try Islam, but in a nonviolent way, try Christianity in a nonviolent way, try Buddhism, try atheism, and whatever, but be nonviolent and free speech, and then the best God wins, so to speak, as long as it's nonviolent and follow some of those basic principles of non-dogma, but then everybody can present their ideas. But go ahead.
I think it needs to be incentivized rather than dictated. I think that's really the thing. We just want to incentivize the
I think it is incentivized. So because
rather than tell people,
like you mentioned briefly, that you kind of lived a different way, and I did at certain periods of time in my life. I think we all did sometimes in our life where we lived a little bit more.
I live the same way.
Ruthlessly, or
nothing changed about my moral compass. Didn't change, is what I'm saying. I've always lived. I'm the same guy today as I was before, but I just have a deeper understanding now. I guess.
Well,
So-
yeah, and
so that's
maybe
not
that's what we're getting at, is that over time we get a better understanding, and if we can just live in nonviolence, free speech, and just know what all the ideas are, then whatever happens happens. But anyway, you can go ahead and attack Islam and whatever else.
So, man, I don't even remember where I was at. So, like,
Dogma
Islam,
and
for
Islam,
example,
okay.
like, because it has such a radicalized grouping within it, we know that the ideology obviously creates it.
Sure.
Regardless of if individuals wanted to, if the preachers, not the preachers, but like their rabbis, or not I forget what they're called. But,
Imams.
yeah,
I forget.
Is it
yeah. Like, regardless of if they wanted to be taken that way or the individuals wanted to be taken that way, we know that the ideology itself harbors it. It's not like we're going to be able to mass influence these people to keep all the parts of it, but say, hey, like, the dogma needs to be gone. Like, we have no way to create that system. People don't want to. The dogma.
Well, they've
itself-
already started doing that in Islam, and I'm not like an Islam apologist, but there are a lot of Islamic sort of, hey, the religion's good, just let's not do the violence and stuff. There's a lot of big.
Yeah, but that's attacking only the weakest point of the
there are
dogma.
reformist
Violence.
movements,
Like,
certainly.
the teachings themselves are still taken as true, right? Like, even Christians are a good example because they talk about this. Like, Christians have evolved way further than Islam has. Like, obviously they're not, pushing crusades anymore or anything, but they still believe a lot of the dogmatic teachings, even if they're not necessarily violent about it. Like, the homosexuality thing, even though it's easy to attack, it's still pretty prevalent. Like, this was like 10 years ago. This was a huge thing that they were still pushing for, and we still had to like fight them on, simply because their dogmatic teaching said, well, it is true. It's even the ones that didn't take it as serious.
A minority.
Well, eventually it became a minority, but it's.
Well, no,
it has to- it's-
I would argue, so to speak, and it's hard to prove it, but at least I believe that not most Christians were like, screw the gays and make sure they can never get married. But there was
Go back to the 50s.
Well, yeah, but,
Well,
but that's
yeah,
but
but
They
that's
absolutely
at least
were.
in our lifetime, it was a
Mm.
loud minority. It wasn't like
It's a fringe thing now.
Yeah, it's
and
a fringe thing.
This is what I was going to bring up is it's Civil War is a good example of this because it was a loud minority that was
Yeah.
righteous. They had the Bible on their side because the Bible's very clear about owning slaves and serving your master, so that they were using. The Southern Democrats were using the Bible as their moral justification.
the
for
same
slavery.
type of slavery things go
And-
back thousands of years, though. At
Oh,
least.
of course. For
Well, yeah, but
America, that's a classic example. My favorite one, though, favorite one is Stetson Kennedy and the KKK, because the KKK used to be a fairly powerful thing in this country, and it had its tendrils and all levels of government, very high-profile Christian righteousness. And it was because of what Stetson Kennedy did in just exposing it, being the first podcaster, really, I think, to take advantage of the Superman radio show well before, TV was a thing and all this, and kind of mocking it and exposing it and allowing the cultural paradigm to shift, allowing the zeitgeist to shift, to see how ridiculous the ideas are, see how worthy of criticism the KKK was, because they were fucking childish as hell, making their little clubhouses and stuff, and they felt very cool putting on their white robes, but you look now and they've been diminished to complete obscurity. And this is I think the reason why these pockets are getting louder. I said I was gonna shut up, but I think it's why they're getting louder, and it's because they're shrinking, and they know they're shrinking, and it's because culture is
debatable.
Yeah.
Culture is well, the ideas have always been there.
Well,
okay? And
ideas.
It took Trump
ideas
rising to
fight
power
for their
to-
life before
for
they die.
them to get loud again. All of the people who came out who felt empowered by Trump's brash, I don't give a fuck attitude. You had people being like openly like, oh yeah, totally, I'm racist. But because they felt empowered by that.
Again,
They were always
it's another
there,
small,
but
loudish
there was
minority.
yes, it's because it's the immune system thing. There wasn't within the larger social discourse, within the conversation, there weren't louder people being the immune system to get the rest of it's the herd immunity thing. Get enough people inoculated against these bad ideas to when one pops up, you just point your finger at it and you go, everybody, look how stupid this is. Point your finger at the dumb kid, you know, in a weird way. And then they just phase themselves out by default. And this is why I've described, you know, our mission in shifting political discourse as Darwinian, because the good ideas are going to win.
Right.
It's only
the bad
gonna
ones
win,
die, but they die with a fight.
you know. Yes, they get angry. It's like trying to kill cancer. You know, you got to zap it with fucking radiation, and you got to cut it out. It's gonna get aggressive, but it's because it's under attack.
It makes the whole body sick as you do so.
Yeah.
But it's the only way to save it, as far as carrying out the metaphor.
Oh, beautiful.
Boom! That was
that was worth a day.
A metaphor baby child that just came out of us.
Oh, I love it.
Ew. Okay. We just had a baby, a cancer metaphor baby.
From watching alien space porn, we were watching alien space porn and made a fucking penis transplant, fucking alien baby. Rick and Morty, man.
Oh yeah.
All Rick and Morty references. I'm not just being weird.
Okay. Let's keep it going. All right. We went a few different places, but I hate to keep cutting off Jeff because, well, he's the guest of honor today.
Thanks.
No pressure.
Yeah. So, man, I don't even remember where we were, to be honest. I know that we were talking about.
You were on on Islam and how they have bad ideas, and you were on Christianity, how sometimes they have bad ideas. And I'll say, briefly before I kick it back to you, hold that thought because basically that's just a. It's like with anything, like I finished Pinker's book recently, Enlightenment Now, and I'm kind of mad at him because he needlessly threw Nietzsche under the bus when it's like, and I don't he didn't even need to go there. Not just threw him under the bus, like forget Nietzsche, like, you know, humanity or humanism is better, but he's like tries to bring up this whole anti-Semitism thing, and like he was, you know, the cause of Hitler and all this other stuff. When it's like, and same thing with when he went after Trump in the book, when it's like, you just don't need to play the racism card when you don't act, when it's like a small minority and you don't like that small minority doesn't represent everybody. So in other words, in any like big group of people, like you could have a group of anything, and there's going to be people with bad ideas within that group for whatever reason. So anyway, go ahead.
So sorry. So to pick up where I left off, so to clarify my point a little bit, my point isn't that like Christians just have universally bad ideas or anything, or that even their ideas are necessarily worse. It's that they're bad ideas that even like secularists from back in the day would have had. It's just harder for them to overcome it because of the dogma attached to it. So with like in regards to the gay thing, like yes, it ended up being a minority of Christians at that time, but just like 20 years before, it wasn't a minority. And even arguably then, there wasn't, like, in some places there wasn't a minority. Somebody actually just sent me a link talking about how Tennessee had passed a law to outlaw homosexuality in 2006 with an 80%, like, vote. Like, there's still places where there's obviously a majority of people who still don't like it. And it's not like that Christianity is totally wrong. I mean, in this regard, I would say, but it's more like they're lagging. And it's just harder when it's such a widespread thing. Like if we were just to take Christianity to say like, hey, Jesus is a philosopher and they're, you know, like God really doesn't mean anything. It's like this whole subjective territory and Jesus is just like this guy that had some cool ideas, just like, you know, Aristotle or Plato or whatever. It wouldn't be bad, but the fact that we like try to conflate it with divinity a little bit, even if we say like, well, I don't necessarily believe in divinity, but I want to use the fact that somebody else does to help bring them over to my side.
Although it's tricky because if you focus on approximately the gospel and perhaps Acts, for example, there's I mean there could be a couple little random.
Well, yeah, I'm not even trying to get into the Old Testament because the Old Testament would be totally separate from like Christ, anyways, right?
But the whole point of Christianity is Christ is the central message and his principles and everything else. But it's not like he's ever saying like the homos are wrong or anything. That actually came in Paul's letters that he wrote while he was in jail. Maybe he was getting raped in prison. Who knows?
Yeah.
And that was decades after the death of Christ anyway. So.
But yeah, but that's something that would be remedied if we took like Jesus as a philosopher, right? If we're just like Paul's just some dude that hung around with this philosopher, so what the fuck do we care what he says? But like, people take Paul as this person handpicked by a divine person who was going to write down words that he wanted him to write down. So then they do say like, well, even if Christ had died, Paul was writing shit that Jesus knew he was going to write, and it was supposed to be written. And so it's very easy for them to conflate like, well, it is true. Because there's this so that's why I don't mind if we want to just completely separate Jesus from a religion in
that's been debated
sense.
For at least 1,000 years or so. Is that a lot of people don't think the books of Paul should be in there, which is like the shorter books in the New Testament, because there are a few others that would remain potentially, but it removes a lot of those things for debate, at least as far as homosexuality and sexuality and some other things. Because the great thing about Jesus, whether you call him a philosopher or a divinity or not, is that his teachings were almost all in non-literal. They were in parables and symbology. And the reason that's important is because then out of that, stories and parables and symbology, then instead of being like cut off the hands and, oh, is that a symbol or not? He speaks in metaphor and story and parables, and then it'll have principles within those stories that you can apply to basically all time forever almost.
Yeah, that's sort of what we're talking about, like Aesop's fables and stuff like that. Sort of do the same thing. It's not a problem, it's just sort of a function of it. Okay. Is whenever you do stuff with parables, it becomes very plug and play for whatever you want to give confirmation bias to, right? So if I wanted to take the man who built his house on the sand versus the man who built his house on the rock, I could say, well, Isaac, your belief in Jesus, or like your justification is you building your house on the sand. Like Jesus obviously told us that this was wrong to begin with. Whereas you might say, well, atheism is the sand because look at the problems it causes and doesn't. Like, we can both find ways to justify that the other person is on the sand and we're on the rock. Like, it is a useful tool in some ways, but it doesn't give us any sort of real clarity about where truth would lie.
Yeah, and I would say that's like that's like the fundamental thing that Sam and Jordan are working to avoid is one, the relative truth that we can't really know truth, and the other is the dogma. So that's the tricky thing with those, but I feel like if you look at all of the symbolism and the I'm not necessarily trying to be a complete Christian apologist, but just at least say there's the value in it. But if you look at all of the parables and symbolism and stories as a whole, there's enough principle there that the principles will straighten things out for the most part.
Yes, and this is actually a really weird thing that I just kind of stumbled into by accident as a lifelong, quote, atheist, is the answer is being Jesus-like in a sense and making space at the table. To be willing as public intellectuals as public intellectuals to be willing to grant that, like, if you read the Bible's full of a bunch of bullshit and a bunch of scary crazy not good. Bible's full of a bunch of fucked up shit. But if you look at Jesus, specifically his actual teachings, if you study him
and his life.
And is like, yes, if you just focus entirely on him, fuck everybody else. This is like just focus on like what we can really say about the guy. And if we do, as public intellectuals, treat him as a philosopher, we're not only educating modern Christians because they don't largely read most of their own Bibles. They go to church for that. They have that piped into their brains by a religious institution. But if we, as in a very secular kind of philosophy way, if we also unpack these things, we're in a sense we're giving them an escape hatch
Right.
into rational land if they need one. I think probably a lot of people do need one because they see the value and they want another way to talk about this. And this is going to be, I think, a big part of my Circle of Light series. Is and to a lesser extent, the Light of Morning thing is because we need a new way to talk about it.
Let me just make it one point on that, and then get more of Jeff's take. Is that so a lot of the point or thesis or whatever main message of Jesus was that the kingdom of God is for everyone, and love your neighbor as yourself, and all of those, like
it's in you.
It's all inclusive. It's in everyone. And in so doing, he would make sure to not, although he got accused of it, but spending time with harlots and, so basically all the rejected people, tax collectors and whores and
lepers and
all those kind of things. Now, the reason I mention that is because my whole thing with Christianity and some of their faults is, if you're really a Christian and let's say you believe any random thing is a sin, whether that's abortion or homosexuality or anything, you should do, if you believe that, whether it's, you want to say it's from a Pauline apostle or whatever, or for whatever reason, and you really honestly do believe the teachings in the life of Christ, then you will do everything to care for that person, because in your mind, that person who's having that issue is having a misunderstanding.
Yes, we're all sinners. We're all sinners. If you're judging somebody else for their sins, you missed Matthew 7:1. And you missed the Gospel of Thomas, and you missed Jesus' core teaching, which is not to judge each other. Right. It is not on you to judge. If there is a judgment to be had, it will be when we reach the fucking gates, motherfuckers. That's when that's going to happen. It's not up to you. Love thy fucking neighbor really means it for a reason, because we all are sinners. We all. And then I
guess what's tricky about it is that this whole thing of like the government being in the business of marriage just never made sense to me. I mean, I get it somewhat from a tax purposes thing sort of deal, but it's like, I don't know, when that whole debate was going on 10, 15 years ago, it's like, it just never made sense to me. Like, I'm like, if I have a black girlfriend, Asian girlfriend, or whatever the case, and I decide I want to get married to her, but just hypothetically speaking, me trying to understand, both sides, it's like, I'm just gonna, and if the government won't honor my marriage, then screw those guys. I'm still gonna live like we're married and whatever. And then on the
so that's what we did, by the way.
That's
no, we can't get married. I guess we all have to be whores. We didn't do that. Like I've been in a committed relationship. Well, not committed, but it's
I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me that
15, 16 years. A lot of
on both sides.
My gay bros, we've all been.
Yeah, but on both sides, to me, and a lot of my homosexual friends said they saw both sides of it too. Is that
just
it's like
gay. Just
or whatever. All my gay friends, whatever, they had been saying, it's just like, we don't need the government to tell us we're in love or not. It's like we can still put on the rings and whatever else. And I don't, because it's, I don't know.
But you also don't need a hospital telling you can't go in there to if your life partner was in a horrible accident and they're only allowing family into the room. You don't want them telling you that you're not the real family. It's both. It's both, you guys. Because if we're going to talk about this issue, I feel like the gay man should talk about it. But because I'm uniquely positioned on this shit, because
you don't know if I'm gay or not.
Like, what's that?
So you don't know if I'm gay or not. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, none of us do ever.
I don't assume anybody's sexuality.
I don't know. My whole thing.
My hot tub is big enough for all of us, man. But no,
So-
that marriage equality is a
It's a
thing
tricky
because
one.
it is. But you need to understand the marriage itself is another one of those words. It's like that used to be the price that you
But,
paid to
okay,
your
yeah.
the guy to buy his daughter, his
Yeah.
virgin 14-year-old daughter for 2 goats and a camel or
Yeah.
whatever, and you bought her and she was your property in marriage and wedding. The words
Yeah.
themselves, that's what they mean. So we're going off of it's like only boys and girls can be together thing.
Well,
Was kind of a
and
stupid idea in the first
sort
place.
of like Connor would say, like procreation and carrying on the family name and everything else was evolutionary and culturally super, super important because everybody.
I mean, no, really, we fuck like rabbits. Look at
Well, no,
our
but
we didn't need to reproduce like that.
Well, no, I mean,
reproduction for the sake of reproduction is the moral compass of a fucking cancer cell. You know, it's
I mean, we
we
had
have
enough
like
kids
8
that were
billion people
sacrificing
now.
them to pagan gods.
Like how do you know God didn't send us here to fucking like even out the population?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like we are evolutionary homosexuals
Well,
are evolutionary advantageous for humans because humans reproduce
it's a tricky
like
thing,
fucking
but
bunnies.
okay. I think what's tricky about it is ultimately, whatever the case may or may not be, everyone, even aside from necessarily divine thing, everyone is responsible for their own soul / consciousness / life and being. So, and our jobs as brothers, just in the human race, is to be there for each other, which means whatever. I don't know. I don't know. It never made sense to me too, just in the fact that it's like if people are whatever people are going to do in the privacy of their bedroom of their home, it's like whatever. If they're as long as it's consenting, nobody getting hurt, well, all right, just
Consider again that pale blue dot
yeah,
Well,
on it.
even
pale blue balls.
just to try to give my 2 cents on this.
Yeah. We want your
please.
5 cents at least.
As far as gay marriage, even if it provided no benefit, as for the pro gay marriage, like why they would care that they should be able to get married.
Yeah, I get both sides, but yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's just more of an issue of even if there was no benefit whatsoever, it's just a matter of being ostracized, right? Like
Yeah.
if the government was like, "Hey, we're going to give balloons to everyone that isn't white," you'd be like, "Well, fucking why?" And they're like, the balloon might not give anything to you, but you're like, "Why do you value me less than everybody else?"
We're 10% of the population.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello?
So just telling them like, "Hey, we want these people to be able to get married, but we don't think you guys should be able to." It's sort of like saying we just think a little bit less of you. You don't quite get what we get. So I mean,
I can't
I
donate
guess.
blood,
It's just-
but straight crackheads can.
No, I mean my
That's another
thing
one
I
I
was
was
trying to
saying.
say is just that as far as I've
Moral
always
thing.
been concerned is that I don't see why the government is involved. Now, if there needs to be a contract as far as like 2 consenting adults want to call themselves any kind of partners, whatever that might be, whether it's for romantic / business / eternal friendship, whether it's sexual or not, and we needed a legal agreement, whether that's for hospital or maybe even for taxes or whatever else, then whatever, sign a stinking piece of paper and life goes on.
and I would agree with that. I don't even see the reason to incentivize the tax purposes of the marriage.
Yeah.
I don't understand why they do that.
It's an equal rights thing. It's like everybody standing on the same floor. Everybody gets the same.
Yeah, I think what Isaac and I are saying though is
economic-
everybody equally just shouldn't be affected by the government in that sense though.
Yeah.
The government
there
shouldn't
isn't.
care about the fucking marriage if
No.
you are or aren't. They shouldn't be able to say you guys can or can't, or we'll give you this if you
Mhm.
do or don't.
Right. But then on the other hand, if 2 adults, or even if there's a throuple, hypothetically, I don't judge it, and the throuple want to be like, okay, we're together, and they need to do that, maybe not for tax purposes, but for hospital visitation or whatever. Cool.
Security. It's economic security. It's the security of your fucking loved ones, being able to protect them. If fucking whatever forbid,
And I get
somebody
it.
dies.
I just don't see why the government needs to put in there stamp of approval or
They
not.
should only be putting in the very basic protections that we all need.
Right, and it just shouldn't
and
be
nothing
like
more. There should be
straight
no
people, gay people. It should just be like, okay, protect our borders and
Yeah, it would be better
regulate the
almost if we
economy.
could like split up our power of attorney and be like, hey, I just want to like, and that's the max amount that the
Yeah.
government's influenced on.
Yeah, there you go. I like that idea.
Yeah. I have a
Anyway.
whole series called Reclaiming Patriotism that's going to be kind of along these lines.
Mm.
How we can really shift our democracy in a positive way in the 21st century using the best wisdom of the past
Wow.
and the brightest
Look at you.
ideas for the future to try and ignite some red, white, and blue nuclear fire
I
inside
wish I
of
had
some
an American
Americans
flag to wave. I like it.
to engage them because I mean there's a lot of value in the work that we're doing here, and I haven't seen any live comments the whole time, and I don't know how
Yeah,
many
we've got
people
3
watch,
viewers. Come
but
on, people.
we have 3 viewers right now. Thank you. Shout out in the comments. Please let us know you're here. But it doesn't. The point is that like the thing that we're capturing right now is fucking gold, which is why like it needs to be a long form podcast series. We need to be unpacking this in so many different ways with so many different people, and empower as many people who get it, because it is a getting it thing. There are people who get it and there are people who don't get it. We're all very different, but the common thing is that we all kind of get it and we all kind of want to move in the right direction, and we all have, it's the Lego movie thing. We all have our own superpowers and our own strengths. And by coming together into kind of like a superheroes union, if you will, and using the full weight, becoming a galaxy of stars and having that with a super massive black hole at the center and having that be the thing that we put out collectively, I think, and working together and networking and like empowering each other. That I think for me is like my new mission here. And Isaac, you're a big piece of that. And I love doing these streams,
So
but
is
like
Jeff.
this should be this. I've just met
Big
Jeff,
time
and I
Jeff.
already love Jeff. But like this format is good. I won't have time to do it all the time, but this is a good platform, and so we can have regular scheduled shows. Like that was going to be a Mindwave thing. At one point, we had every Sunday we would drop one of these and have it very branded and have like bring in the flashy graphics, and it made it exactly made it a big experience. By coming together and kind of be planning and like nailing these down on specific things and getting everybody to come in and like like we can make these really 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 fucking cool, but we also need to really take the conversation long form in high NPR status, for the podcast.
Welcome to Fresh Air.
Yes.
Today we're talking with Jenner and Jeff. So, Jeff, we'd like to hear more from you.
Sorry, I missed some of that. I just got to I'm so sorry.
No,
It was just Jenner rambling.
Oh, hey man, you
I ramble more.
You gotta hustle. You gotta
Yeah.
hustle, guys, because content
One day-
creators, we are the
You can be
creators of the
employee
future.
month, too.
These are the jobs of the future, and they pay almost nothing right now. So I'm going to use every tool in my toolbox to empower this work for as many people as possible and really take it big time in a way that can really, move the needle forward on a societal level, but also create a profit model that will include profit sharing so that all of us can benefit from doing this work outside of the current system, because the current system is all ads and shit. So that's, if you're not familiar with me by now, that's who I am and why I'm here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so one thing I was trying to get to, but we didn't really get to, and that I want to hear from Jeff on, because it's like one of my main things that they didn't really get to in that debate is this idea that, okay, so to go to the metaphor briefly of like pretending there's bullets in a gun, and what, even if we know that there's not, then there's value in that, and that it makes extra careful sure that nobody accidentally gets their face shot off. But I think what goes in all of this, whether we're telling people to be nice to gays, or we are telling people to be Christ-like, or we're telling people to follow their heart or whatever it is, whether it's a practical thing like how we handle a gun, or if we act like there's a God or not, then we have to take into account what happens on the inside, which I think is like the main thing. And sometimes it's overlooked, at least in the discussion. So like if I hand you a gun and we pretend that there's bullets even though there's not, then the big thing that happens isn't just that nobody got their face shot off, but there's then more trust between us, and there's more trust between us, and like I become a more good handler of a gun, and I become a good handler of a human relationship and everything else. And so that's where I think a lot of the focus needs to be. But I would like to hear what Jeff thinks.
So I like the analogy of the loaded gun because it works in a very like personalized setting. Like if it's you and me, and let's say I've never held a gun before, and you're like, "Hey, dude, here's a gun. Here's how it works. When it's loaded, it can be dangerous. You need to hold it and care for it like this. Right. It can be really safe as long as you know what you're doing." You can make a lot of good points to me as long as we're on a one-on-one individual basis. But when we start mass producing the gun and we're just like, we send them out, loaded, some not loaded, whatever. Some people just don't know what to do with it, so they pick it up and then they just start firing it to see what it does. Yeah. In that same sense, that's how I sort of think of a lot of these ideologies, is like we're making them almost too lethal or too dogmatic, and then mass producing them and just sending them out. So that's why, and I think everybody's goal kind of is like this. We're trying to soften it a bit. Like we're like, all right, let's make guns, but let's maybe send out bulletproof vests too, or maybe we, maybe we don't send out the ammo at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it just becomes problematic right away. And even though it can be something that's safe and can be used responsibly, it's happening so frequently and so mass produced, and people have different interpretations of what they should be doing with the gun that we're seeing like problems.
Well, okay, so let me take that real quick on that point. The gun really is our words in the metaphor. In other words, with our words, we can convince somebody of anything. We can convince somebody to kill themselves. We can convince somebody to blow up a building with our words. Same thing, we can convince somebody to be a good parent, or turn their lives around potentially. Although for the most part, that's tough, but we try to build that environment where our words are making people live better and do better. But for the most part, our words mainly work on ourselves more than each other. Now, to not too much like be a Christian apologist exactly, but in the stories of the Bible, a lot of what he was doing, at least in the story sense or symbolic or whatever you want to call it, was to undo the dogma of that day. And he was trying to be all about non-dogma, and now the law is of love, and you don't need to make sacrifices and all those kind of things. But here's some symbolic ways to do it, whether it's symbolic baptism, symbolic have some wine and wafer, whatever. Maybe we need those rituals, maybe we not, but they had a point of you don't need to sacrifice animals, and don't be violent, and don't be dogmatic, but here's what we're trying to get at. So to the metaphor of the gun, it's like you send out the guns and the bullets, and you say you send it out with a lot of instructions on, these are only to be used to whatever in emergency situations. Don't load them unless we're being attacked by baby Hitler grows up, or whatever the case.
I have a really God, I want to hear more from Jeff, but I have a really flag. It's a flag.
Don't forget that thought.
It's a flag. It's a flag. It's huge.
Flag,
it's a good one.
And then go to Jeff's thing.
All right. All right. So we'd agree. Sorry, was Jenner going first, or
no? You go. I got a flag.
Okay, just write down your flag, and we're good.
All right.
Good one.
So. And that's where I think I'd agree a lot with you. Where I think I've agreed with a lot of different people that view Jesus in this way. That he probably did try to get away from dogma, and he did try to sort of override that Old Testament. And if we look at him like how we would look at maybe like ourselves, or maybe a more public figure like Jordan Peterson, it could be just like they have this desire and goal to get away from the dogma and try to keep the good parts.
Right.
But what we see is because they've attached themselves a little bit to the part that's dogmatic, the dogma retakes over. And that's sort of why I try to avoid Islam, Christianity, and all Judaism just as wholes, is because even if we have good intentions and we just want to try to take the good parts and be like, all right, well, the Bible is right. It's just we got to try to forget about the dogmatic parts. Even if we ourselves are not dogmatic, the dogma will retake over because that's what that part is designed to do. Sorry, I also had some thoughts about the loaded gun in our words, but I don't
Sure.
want to stumble around. I want to let Jenner say whatever he thought of.
Just
Sure.
on this loaded gun thing, because when gun culture started really taking off in the US, ironically, you guys, we need a kind of NRA, but we need the original one because
Yeah.
the original NRA was much like it was a rifle club for men, which they would get together. They would clean their guns together. It was a fraternal brotherhood type thing, like a lodge thing, okay? They'd
Sure.
get together, they'd clean their guns, there would be a competition, there would be bonding, there would be training and safety and everything. In this, it would become somewhat ritualized. Now,
Yeah.
the NRA is obviously a completely different thing.
Right.
And Greenpeace is another good example of something that kind of started off like that was doing a really valuable and important thing, but just became a corporatized nightmare that is super dogmatic and problematic and corrupt and horrible. But we kind of need gun clubs that taking the fraternal brotherhood thing that we make it our mission to share the guidance and safety and wisdom within this kind of communal support like structure that's quasi ritualized in a kind of way, and just to be this like kind of for discourse, we need to be Jesus's table in a sense, which is why I like tying this to him specifically, because it was kind of like, you look at his disciples, it was him, yes, but he had the table, all the disciples went to the table,
Yeah.
and then they all went off into the world to create their own tables and on through the eons. And this is the thing, that the really important flag that I wanted to get in there is just on that kind of the value, the evolutionary advantageousness of
Well,
the fraternal brotherhood and support, ritualized kind of, not church, but some kind of like,
yeah, and I'll just mention and
you
kick
know.
it back to Jeff, is that that's what we're always doing, whatever that we are, whether we want to say, we're Christian and we want to make Christianity better, or we're atheists, we want to make the world better, or slash atheist better, or we want to say just human beings, we want to make the world a better place for humanity. Great. But in so doing, there's always going to be those things that they fell apart over time, or they worked so many decades ago for some reason and now they don't. So there's always going to be, that's like a universal thing that like every mature adult should know by now, whether you're talking about the university system or any major business type corporation or all kinds of things. They're always going to need to be updated because the world is just so constantly complicated and changing all the time.
They need strong cores. I think that's what we've lost a lot of the strong.
And I would say that we
have institutions.
We have that strong core, and that's probably what that Jordan's point is, at least in those debates with Sam Harris, is that we actually have that strong core, and that's why it's amazing that even though we have all this weird evil stuff in the world and all these horrible ideas, that we're actually constantly making the world a better place. And I think that has to do with that sort of internal value structure that a lot of these philosophers talk about. It's inside of us, and we don't even consciously know what it's doing or why it's doing it, but we're constantly making the world a better place because of our largely unconscious internal value structure. But with that, I'll kick it back to Evil Morty.
All right. Yeah. And in some sense, I would agree with that. I think it's more we have such mass, we can have trial and error. Yeah. And so sometimes there are people that don't have necessarily good intuitions, or we have large cultural ones that persist for a while that change. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know what we're talking about. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted recently.
That's
We
fine.
Yeah, I know that some of this stuff is it's going to feel very redundant here when we have that discussion because we're going to end up
Yeah,
probably bringing up a lot of these points again in there. So,
that's fine.
um,
I'm just trying to
oh yeah,
flesh it
yeah,
out a bit if we can.
no, for sure. I hate it when like we have like if anyone has a conversation a few days later and you have to re-bring up stuff and people are like, well, wait, I told you about this. And it's like, yeah, but the
Yeah,
other
no,
people weren't
it's
here.
fine if we
Like,
do or not.
so,
Um, what were you just saying though?
oh, shit, I don't even know. Um, Pretty much, I didn't even know what I expected from this. I knew we talked about this a little bit, but I really thought
Yeah.
we'd delve into politics, and
Oh
I
yeah,
was
we can delve into politics at least for a few minutes. Um,
I don't even know what
to
we talked about. I just
to
kind
get
of
off of this.
expected
Maybe
it.
this is getting a little bit.
Bring on the asteroid.
Bring on the asteroid. Yeah, we can get off this topic for a little bit before we wrap it up. Maybe in just a bit. But sure, we could just because I feel like I brought up that thing and maybe we're beating a dead horse, but that's fine. Maybe it's worth beating, but maybe it's turning a little bit redundant, and it can. Uh, just partly because Jeff is in that same group and everything else, and that's cool. But I think Jeff and I often, when we're talking online or whatever, we get more into politics, and I forget exactly what we were talking on some things the other day when Jeff was just in the comments when it was Jeff and I mean Jenner and I on Monday. But yeah, we can do the politics.
Yeah, I just don't really have any direction to go, so that's why I was a little bit reluctant to bring it up. I know we had talked about the Tucker Carlson thing a little bit, but I don't know what really more there is to go. I mean, we could talk about it, but
okay, so I don't know the thing with it. I think the thing, and maybe we agreed on that thing with the Tucker Carlson little debacle of an interview, was that they just kind of both messed it up, but it's a little bit of a viral video. I don't know if Jenner saw it, but there's this video where basically, I don't know if you guys know that guy very well or not. I know some people do, but he's kind of trolling Tucker Carlson. And the way that I looked at it was just that, I don't know. I was a little suspicious. I'm sure it's a real video now, but it's like, it just seems like a wasted opportunity on both of their parts where they could have both had a good, productive interview to get each other's sides and have a little few minutes discussion or whatever. And then they both just kind of wasted it. And my big thing with that guy is he's basically just like, you are a millionaire getting paid by billionaires, which is like, what? That just means he's successful at his job, getting paid by a corporation. There's lots of people getting paid $15 an hour, getting, their money from Jeff Bezos, and that doesn't make them horrible. And then eventually, if they're successful, they might be, and a millionaire isn't even a lot anymore. That's like barely upper middle class. So
Bernie's allowed to be a millionaire because he wrote books. The rest of the millionaires, they're not allowed to, though.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole okay. The whole thing with that is just that I hate the argument just that money is so horrible.
yeah,
Where it's like, okay, there are horrible things, but you can't just like write off a person as they're making a lot of money, so then they're horrible. Like that's an argument people put on Jordan Peterson sometimes. It's like, oh, he's a charlatan because he's making money off of this and all this stuff. When it's
Bill
like
Gates.
Yeah, well, that's a debatable one
I
too.
I don't know how people feel about Bill Gates, but that's probably a wormhole. I don't know if we want to go down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's worth it, but anyway, I just don't like the whole argument of, and I'm not sure where you guys are on this, but and I hate the whole like just like down with capitalism thing because I think almost similar to some of these ideas we're talking about a little bit ago with philosophy and even religion, it needs to be more of like, hey, let's agree on some things we definitely want to avoid and some things we definitely want to strive for together, and which is largely what we do in America is we have regulations on our businesses, and so that we can avoid horrible labor practices and such things, and we try to do better as a culture. But to just say people who make money are evil is just a horrible thing.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I don't think that, because money is just a different form of power, and power
Yeah,
doesn't
it's just a
necessarily
tool.
equate evil.
Yeah.
It certainly gives more opportunity for evil to have outreach, and a lot of people
Yeah.
make arguments that power corrupts. But it doesn't intrinsically, it's not like I could give you $10 million today and then tomorrow you'll just be eviler. Like maybe you will be, maybe you'll become more selfish or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's dependent on person to person, situation to situation. So I'd agree that I don't think his point there is like super valid. I could take it as where he's talking about, well, you have the self interest of millionaires, like you're like I talk about against people who have the interest of keeping their money, and you might be one of those people. But he didn't present it like as an argument like that. More just like you are evil because of this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Well, I
agree
think,
with that.
yeah.
Yeah. But I also, from like a media standpoint, like if that guy had acted like how Tucker Carlson ended up, where he's like, well, just fuck you, you're a moron, yeah, you're a piece of shit, whatever.
Well, he didn't
I
do
don't
that
think
right
that they would
away.
have pulled it.
Tucker was cool at first until the guy just like
Yeah,
kept
yeah,
pushing
no, no,
his
no,
buttons
yeah,
for
yeah,
like 5
definitely. I'm
minutes.
not sorry. I'm just talking about like when it did happen.
Yeah.
Like I think if that guy would have done that, I don't think they would have pulled it because obviously everybody we all get to create our own narrative, and if they can make their opposition look bad, like why would they pull it? But in that sense, like it became very that guy ad hommed first, and then Tucker Carlson like amplified it right back at him, and they're like, well, fuck, we can't air this now because we both look bad. Like
Yeah, I mean, they both looked really bad, and it just seemed like a wasteful opportunity. Well, and like, they weren't originally going to be each other's opponents. It wasn't like they were going to have a debate or whatever. It was just like, hey, you went to this economic conference or whatever in Switzerland, so what happened? And he's like, oh, Tucker, you were on board with like saying he's like jumping bandwagons or whatever because like something about taxes, but oh, you're just a millionaire, get paid by billionaires. Mwah!
well, so the one thing I don't get is that's sort of that guy's whole shtick from what I could see though. So like I don't
Yeah,
understand like why they would invite him and expect him to act different. I guess.
I guess, but I guess what happened is he went to this economic conference in Switzerland or whatever, and things went a certain way. So they just expected him to be able to talk about it, which would have been a pretty good interview and all that. And both would have been win-win. But the troll was the instigator, and he kind of threw it away. And then he tries to kind of play the victim in the cell phone video or whatever. But they could have had a productive interview, and it just kind of turned into a total waste.
So yeah. Other than that, I don't really know any political like discussions we've had that we could even cover.
Yeah,
in,
I mean,
minutes. Like,
yeah, the only other thing was like we've gotten into a little bit of the whole like like one of the little I don't know if we'd call it a debate or discussion or whatever, was just how I try to tell people to not put a lot of energy into criticizing the president when it's like the most obvious thing in the world. It's like, okay, there's an idiot right there, but let's focus on things that we can do productive, especially probably more so in our own community or whatever. And sometimes that can come. Sometimes I can come off as a troll that way, and maybe I do, but although it's somewhat intentional, only because I really do want people, like for their own sake, to put energy into productive things if they can. And
yes.
But then sometimes I come off as a Trump supporter when I'm not really that. But it's like,
And
yeah,
that's a discussion I feel like we could have sometime that would take probably a little bit.
yeah,
Because I don't think it's mutually exclusive that
sure.
we can work. We have to work on ourselves or critique. And I definitely think that there's utility in, even if we think that Trump's never going to change, like we could complain at him all day, he's going to do whatever the fuck he's going to do. Like we still have how we present ourselves to other like entities, right? Like other countries and other like what we want for future leaders. So if like he comes out all the time and we're like, you know what, like fuck it, we don't give a shit anymore if he says stupid shit, then like when people are trying to pick candidates later, they're like, oh, remember when people fucking stopped giving a fuck about when Trump did this? Well, we can put this guy up who said all this crazy shit. They're not going to care. Like,
yeah. And one thing that I also bring up in that is that most of the time, like 90% of the time, any of those kind of arguments or whatever are only about language and, stupid tweets that have no real effect on the world. And yeah, sure, maybe it's like he should be more sensitive or whatever, and that's obvious. But it's like, okay, can you tell me one like law or one bill or whatever, one I forget whatever else terminology that you want to give it, thing that he actually did that affects anyone in their real lives. So give me an example, and they have little or no examples. And that's not to say that the language is meaningless, but it's like, okay, let's focus on, like, okay, when
like
Gavin,
policy over.
Like when Gavin Newsom, the California governor, was asked on kind of some of those loaded questions like, oh, what do you think about President Trump? Da, 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 da. He'll just say, I'm not going there. You know my position. We have like 60 lawsuits against the president or whatever. But da, 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 I just need to get things done in California and all this, which I think that is just so much more productive when it's like, okay, we can do lawsuits if there's something that we think we can do or whatever, because maybe we think this and that thing was a violation for whatever reason, and just focus on that, especially when, no matter what, you're going to need to work with that person, the president, for example. And if you can work with him, it will be better for you. That's not a bad thing. Like in California, it ended up probably getting them more, money and medical supplies and this or that. And that doesn't mean that, you're a Trump supporter as the governor of California if you just have civil conversations while you're taking him to court 60 times in a year or whatever. So, yeah, I guess just like I try to see if we can focus on being productive.
And I feel there's like two separate things. Like as far as like Trump policy goes, like I would agree. A lot of times, like there's a lot of policy like I agree with that I don't even know if other people would agree with. Sorry, what?
No, I was just saying a minute ago. I was trying to think of the word policy, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, like I think 2 years ago there was actually like a big policy that he put forth about cleaning up like ocean space and reducing our like footprint out in the ocean that I don't think anybody even knew about, like right-wing or left-wing media was really covering. So, I mean, he does like stuff every now and then that I would agree with. And there's a lot more of it than people would probably think that they agree that he does.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I do agree with him, but there's also, I just don't see any utility in like getting away from also critiquing the rhetoric constantly, because if it didn't have any effect whatsoever, maybe we could like justify like what we need to reduce it. But we definitely do see like when the leaders, like we can even look at Obama, right? Like some of the stuff that he would say, people have pointed to and said, well, this is actually has caused an uprise in, race problems because he sort of like made it sound like white people are the problem.
Yeah.
Alternatively, Trump has done, a couple things here and there about like justifying like certain actions that he's done in the past and stuff like that. People are like, well, no, you fucking shouldn't, because like, it was pretty bad what you did. And my main complaint, I guess, from like the right or whatever is like, he can't be wrong. Like nothing he does is wrong. So if we find out that he did say he grabbed women by the pussy, it's almost on the left's responsibility to say, well, it was fucking wrong that he said that. Like you're all justifying they said it, but we should at least agree that it was fucking wrong for him to say it. Like,
well, I hate to give an excuse, but the only thing about that example is that's when he was running for president. So maybe just for that reason, that was one thing that he came out and he didn't deny it, which I was kind of proud of him, for lack of a better word. But he came out and he said, I shouldn't have said that. That was a long time ago, and I said it in the moment, and I wasn't whatever. And he's like, I would never want people to look at that language in a serious way. It was just something. He made a big apology, basically saying, "Don't like that's not the kind of image I want." I don't. Sure. So it's a big deal when somebody can make an apology, and that's like one of the few things that he came out and said, "Oh, sorry, that was said. I shouldn't have ever said that."
Yeah, but there's a difference between like having Trump understand that he's wrong in this instance and then like his voter base, right? Like if he's never wrong from his like like we talked about earlier. Trump probably doesn't say things and hope people take it dogmatically, but there are people that take everything he does as a dogma. And so it's sort of like we're attacking that dogma of where people are like, and it's these older people who have very old values who you would think would like sort of agree with you, but they're like, well, no, it's just a locker room talk. That's how the men talk, and that's like, it's okay that they talk that way. And it's like, no, it sort of isn't okay. Like,
yeah, well, and that's the thing about that example is that he's the one that came out and said he shouldn't.
Yeah, no, and I agree with him. I'm not trying to say like he was wrong. Like I was saying, what he did in the past was wrong. Yeah, and you have to attack the dogmatic following still.
Yeah, like, well, okay, and okay, this is where it gets a little good. Is that in politics? Okay, there is roughly 40% red and blue, like of each, roughly, and then there's like roughly 20% that are like the independent / swing that really decide the elections. Like there's 40% ish on each side. They're just that way every year. As far as people that will go out and vote and what they're going to vote for. And then this is the, and I think I talked a little bit about this maybe off air the other day, but so it's like you've got that 40% on each side, and then you got the 20% that are, there's swing that could back and forth either way. So what you should do as a, like if you're going to potentially bring it another way, is you don't just focus on the 10% that are horrible, disgusting people, the deplorables, as Hillary says. You focus on everybody's a great person, and you could maybe say, oh, sorry, you have a bad candidate, but hey, on the blue team, we've got all this other stuff that's great and better and balloons and whatever. But they always attack that, whatever, whether it's 1% or 5 or 10%, whatever it is, that are those people that are all like rah violence and screw the gays and whatever else. It's like that's what's focused on, when it's like that's a very small percentage of the people. But if you focus on everyone, then you could potentially bring people over. And what we learned, especially 4 years ago, is that people weren't voting for him because he's, grabbing pussies and doing stupid things. People are voting for him because he's anti-establishment, and they think they know what he's thinking, even if he's thinking something stupid, they know what it is. Whereas Hillary, you have no idea, other than you don't trust anything that she's saying. And then to wrap my spiel up, they give a horrible candidate this year that's he's like Weekend at Bernie's, prop him up and hope for the best, that he's not gonna like say anything stupid, because they won't really let him speak in public hardly. And I think it's honestly disrespectful to all of the voters, like all of America. Like if they want to call themselves a party, but they're like so addicted to the establishment and potentially like, oh, is this going to be our man, our puppet, whatever. But I think if they had more respect for the voters and potentially the America that they want to have, they would have given a real candidate. And that even could have been, it could have been anybody. It could have been any of those other
Andrew Yang.
It could have been maybe him, or well, the only thing with Andrew Yang maybe even was the best candidate in reality, but probably not as far as you would need.
In terms of likelihood, in terms of like unifying, and genuinely progressive.
I don't want to grill Isaac too big on this, because an Andrew Yang discussion would go on forever.
Oh, I know, yeah. They were already 2 hours in. We're in trouble.
I'm just saying
we just opened up freaking.
Well, maybe we'll get on to that next week. We can go more down that, but or whatever, whenever at time again. But the tricky thing about him is, and I think I mentioned this too when we were having our talk, Jen and I, off air the other day, is how that, like, I was a bit on the Ron Paul vote 8 years ago, but the problem with him is that, and people in certain backings or whatever, is that they're just so not the establishment that they wouldn't be able to get most of that blue. So I don't see the electability on the blue side, and then on the overall side, it's. But my point was, whether it's Andrew Yang or those girls or whoever else, Mayor Pete or whoever, any of those would have been better than Weekend at Bernie's Sleepy Joe, and they gave us the worst one. I just honestly think that's
Bernie would have been worse. I gotta say, like,
Yeah.
I think if we're putting him on a scale, Bernie would have been the absolute worst choice.
well,
Uncle Joe is bad,
at
but
least Bernie could hold a conversation without being like, you know.
Yeah, well, Grandpa Joe is smart enough to let the kids run the computers, I think.
Yeah, but
Just hair leg and
yeah, in a debate or in a the problem with running for president is you have to speak in public a lot and have debates and town
all
halls
he
and
has to
whatever
do
else.
is be more intelligible than Donald Trump. I think we're okay.
Well, but that's the thing. You can't even hold a conversation half the time.
yeah, I don't know. I think I'd agree with
know.
Isaac on this one. I think if it was, I'm not a huge Trump person, but if it was between Biden and Trump of who could intelligibly converse, I'd probably pick Trump.
Well, yeah,
it doesn't have to be intelligible. That's what I'm saying. I called it a while ago. And I'm pretty sure we're getting 4 more of Trump, and
definitely.
That was sealed a while ago. I think.
I guess, but I think it would be a lot more respectful and a lot more serious. Like, like if any of those people, I mean, maybe Bernie's questionable. We could say whatever on a couple specific ones, whether it's Bernie or Mayor Pete or whoever, but just about anybody would be better. Maybe not Bloomberg, but it's just tricky. But even bad. Bloomberg, but they all have their issues, of course. But I think. Now, maybe if this was the 1988 Biden or even the 2008 Biden, it would be different. But the one that can barely stand up or hold a conversation or do anything.
Fucking terrifying.
Well,
this is who we got. This is the guy. This is the only guy. It's all we got. It's all we got. And I've been long criticizing him for a while too, out of concern, out of genuine concern for his mental state. When I saw that he was like one of the front runners, I was like, you guys.
Yeah, I didn't think it was serious at first.
He just forgot Obama's name on stage. He forgot Obama's name on stage. Are you not? Who
does that?
Worried? Are you not worried? You should be worried. So I was saying this way long ago.
Like I would be more like when people criticize Trump, like, oh no, he'll have the nuclear football launch codes or whatever. I would be more worried about Biden in that regard. Like he's gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna order a pizza, and then whatever, off goes the nukes. Or he has like
get my grandson in here. Teach me how to use Tic Tac.
He has like an Alzheimer's thing where he like thinks like. Who are you? Oh, okay. He thinks he's like back in Vietnam or something, and
get the nurse.
Yeah, get Charlie, and he's like, we're gonna nuke him. And
my favorite mess up by him for technology wise. I don't know if you guys remember this or watched the first debate at the end when they gave everyone their plug, and he wanted to tell everyone to text Biden to a number
300.
And instead, he says, "Go to Biden 30330." So everyone goes to this random fucking website that somebody from like Bloomberg's campaign quickly like bought out or something, and like reads like it's like Jesus Christ, man! You got to at least know. And his complaint later was like, I didn't understand what it was. Or something.
Yeah.
It's like Jesus, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
gaffes. He's been having them for a while though. It's not really new, you know. He had gaffes like this. All the way back, through the Obama years and before, it's just they never really focused in on him. And now, of course, he's under the microscope. Now it's like every interaction that he's ever had with another female now is under question.
Well, and
Kofefi, right?
And yeah.
So like, yeah, any slip up's going to be extremely scrutinized the closer and closer you get to presidency.
Yep.
Yes, I don't know. It just seems like they're surrendering. Like it's laughable to me when I see these people like, oh look, he's doing well in this poll and that poll. Sure, you can twist those polls however you want, but there's just no way that, especially when this is a massively important economic year and a lot of other things on those lines. It's like from an economic standpoint, you can love or hate Trump, but it would be better for the economy just to keep the same Mickey Mouse administration for the time being to get the economy going the way that it should go, compared to put in an Alzheimer's patient.
Yeah, find something that works better. That was the whole. You guys had one chance to fucking do this, and you were trying to play it safe like you did in 2016. We saw how that worked. You guys did not learn the fucking lesson. You made the same mistake again. You're forcing people into the same bullshit fucking turd sandwich versus giant douche dichotomy. Trump's going to get reelected. We're going to have a bunch of more of this shit.
Well, that's why I think any of those guys, Yang would have done better, or what's his name?
Marion Williamson would have done better.
Any of those guys, but largely because they're anti-establishment, and that's what. Even Bernie, I don't think he would have won, but he would have done better. And that they're anti-establishment.
I think Trump would have destroyed Bernie, just absolutely destroyed him.
Maybe, but not as much as he would destroy
Joe's got a little bit of Obama armor on. That's why he was on the stage in the first place. So Joe's going to have a little bit of armor, but even the Democratic establishment was.
If he can remember his name or anything.
Yeah, he's got. It has been he has been chosen as the thing that the entire Democratic
and
everything is going to throw their
my only other point too is just that they've had years to figure this out, so whatever they had to do for years, it shouldn't just be let's have Biden do it. They should have figured this out a year or 2 or 3 years ago, a serious alternative. And they're just let's hope this works.
Fucking election of all time. You need to put your absolute best foot forward. Absolute best choice forward. 2016, they're like, oh, I know, Hillary. She used to be married to that guy who jizzed on that one lady. Really? Hillary Clinton, the most toxic lizard person of all time.
Toxic lizard person.
According to Mindwave, she is the most toxic lizard. She's the most toxic lizard creature on Earth. Is how I describe Hillary on my show, because I'm just this is just political windsock. Totally, she's like a Republican convert from whoever just used to be super homophobic, super right wing, and now she's like, I love everybody, and we're like, you're so fake, you fucking.
No, she's just
war. She's a war hawk.
What do you want me to say? Okay, I'll say that.
Windsock, political fucking windsock. She has absolutely no constitution whatsoever. She will blow whichever way the wind goes, man.
Well, and that's exactly why Trump won, and why he's going to win again, is because with a windsock, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Whereas with Trump, he'll say a bunch of stupid, retarded things, but
he'll be a fucking
you have some. It's he's a guy with crayons and special ed, whatever. But you kind of know what he's doing, and if you get the people around him that are like, look, go play with this, then go play with Twitter for a while, and they sign his name on some stuff or whatever while he's busy.
When he eats his chicken McNuggets and watches Dora the Explorer, and
whatever.
Talks about how bad he wants to deport her.
You have an idea what's going on, or at least anyway. I don't know what Jeff thinks.
I pretty much agree. I think we're sort of at a place where we're just all sort of agreeing. I didn't know how much longer you guys wanted to go. I'm going to get off here in a little bit anyways because I got to make dinner.
Okay, yeah, we'll wrap it up in just a minute. I guess the only thing I would say on that point, too, that comes to mind is how that the other criticism Joe Biden gets is he's very much a lot of what they originally wanted was either someone that was a minority or a female or someone from a not wealthy background of some sort, at least not a millionaire, as some people will say. And he's just a completely white man, millionaire establishment.
Yeah. If your first criticism of Joe Biden, if you're listing a bunch of criticism, if the first one is white, stop. Stop that shit. It's insane. Yes, if you want to say he's racist-y, he's a rapey, whatever. It's even Just go to the claims and actually
Well,
be genuine about your
it's not a
criticisms
criticism
there.
on him.
But
It's a criticism on the DNC.
Yeah,
That,
it's just like
they thought like that was
he's white.
largely why that they were trying to put forth Hillary, and maybe they had 2 or 3 female candidates and at least 1 or 2 black candidates and a gay
Mayor
candidate.
Pee-pee butt.
Yeah, well, they were trying to put forth a minority and
diversity hires, but they're shitty hires.
But they were all better hires than Joe Biden.
Well,
but anyway,
yeah.
You want to say anything else?
Nepotism, not anything else.
Yeah. Anyway, anything else before you take off, Jeff?
No. I mean, it was good. I'm glad we talked about religious stuff a little bit, political stuff a little bit. I'm pretty much open whenever. I do stuff like this on various people's podcasts, so if you ever want me to come on, just let me know.
Yeah, when you have time in the next week or 2, let's do it. We'll see if we can be a little bit more prepared, maybe, and get down some things that are up your alley, and we'll see what happens.
Cool. All right. Well, you guys have a good one, and thanks for having me on.
All right. Anytime. Thanks a lot.
It's good talking to you, man.
All right. Good talking to you too, Joe.
Peace.
And Isaac.
Peace.
All right. Bye.
Arts and candy magic.
All right. Is that it? Are we done, folks, or what? Or are we going off here at least?
Yeah, man, that was great.
Sure.
That was a
cool.
really good one. He's a good podcast guest. We should line him up to for somewhere on Mindwave for one of the episodes that you are going to host. Were you going to announce that to your audience?
Ladies and gentlemen, I will be hosting the Mindwave podcast as soon as Jenner tells me to.
You're gonna have your own series, man, and it's like he's the Gasly. You're gonna run it. It's gonna be your baby. You can do whatever you want with it. Jesse Rogers is gonna have his own series. He's taking over Humanity First season 3. We're gonna reboot it. He's gonna be the new host of Humanity First. Are you guys ready for this shit? I just realized we're still live, and I'm like, that's naughty. But like only like 2 or 3 people are watching, right?
One person.
That's not. One person.
If
okay,
don't tell
anybody. Don't tell anybody.
I don't know what
That's
the secret is, but it's a secret.
Fuck, I forgot.
If this one person wants to say anything, they should, or speak up a question before we're done, because we're about to wrap it up in just a second.
Yes. Yeah. The live comments are not showing on this end, but
no, I think there's just no one making them today.
No, it's because Jareen shared it somewhere. And then there were a bunch of
there were viewers, but I don't think there were
comments on Jareen's thing. But yeah, for some reason I don't know. They weren't shown up here. But we had a few Faye Koo and Fred Eater was watching. So thank you guys for participating and doing this thing with us. If you're still around, Jareen Elkins was around earlier. I think she had to dip out. No, these streams are great. And
well, especially now with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, it's different. It's different from making a podcast, and the structure is slightly different. I think that's one of the big things that I'm gonna have to do is kind of nail down like a good structure for the podcast show medium, and then the live
today we're gonna do philosophy segment, and then religious segment, and politics segment. All those things Grandma says not to talk about segment.
Yeah, like it, but always keep the wormholes and the potholes and the rabbit holes, all the holes, the skin holes, to take it gross, because people love the fucking R-rated podcast and for mature. It's one of those things people dig. But man, great fun. This was great fun.
Cool.
I'm gonna have to be up early tomorrow. I'm gonna go do some trickle up shit with Mindful Skeptics podcast, which I haven't caught up with boys in a long time. So that's gonna be super fun. I have been Jenner from Mindwave. Mindwave.media is where you can find me. Follow us on Twitter at Mindwave Podcast, or me individually at Mindwave Jenner. Thanks for
All right, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys, and all right, bye.
See you.